hope it helps you to decompress and release stress. And I wanted you to relax. Maybe let your guard down a little bit for me.
Let my guard down?
Yeah, the emotional guard you protect yourself with.
Social media has been buzzing with one topic since the initial reports. Appeared online, what actually transpired between Yandy and Travis Cure, and why is the internet saying that Mendeecees is totally insane? New reports, purported fan recordings, and purported eyewitness statements have ignited the entertainment industry, even if the complete truth is yet unknown. We're delving deeply into every aspect of this developing storm tonight because everyone is talking about it. Not because it has been verified. A mystery video purporting to depict Yandy in a late-night moment with actor Travis Cure has gone viral, according to fan chatter. The internet doesn't need clarity to blow up, and it did, even though the video itself is fuzzy and the viewpoint is dubious. Timelines containing responses, charges, and ideas ranging from accidental miscommunication to outright treachery appeared within minutes. In the midst of the mayhem, rumors started to circulate that Mendeecees had confronted Yandy in private, enraged and demanding explanations. Is any of this true, though? Is it fan fiction that has been overdone? Or is it just the most recent social media craze that has taken off on its own? We analyze what the internet community is saying tonight and explain why fans are unable to turn away before anyone had a chance to comprehend what had sparked it. The commotion surrounding the issue continued to grow. The atmosphere surrounding the story felt heated, like a match dropped in a room full of dry paper, as people circulated that ambiguous video online and whispered about what they thought they witnessed. When the video first surfaced, some people said it looked like Yandy. Others believed it was Travis Cure, and then an unstoppable chain reaction started. The internet decided its own version and advanced it more quickly than anyone could attempt to stop it. Even though no one actually knew what had happened at that precise moment, it developed into a dialogue that leaped into lives, slipped into comment sections, and spilled into discussions unrelated to anything but the excitement of conjecture. Some claimed to be certain they understood Yandy's body language, pointing out minute moves as though they were skilled gesture readers. Others contended that the perspective was too hazy to verify anything. But because the rumor had already taken root, it was no longer relevant. As the video continued to circulate, changes started to appear. These included zoomed-in and slowed-down versions, as well as filters to sharpen the shapes. Despite the fact that the truth remained buried behind small pixels, each alteration made the story feel more dramatic. Online viewers saw the unknown as exciting, while others who were allegedly involved saw it as a storm building above their heads. When the buzz reached Mendeecees, the true change occurred. Initially, the manner people were constantly tagging him concerned him more than the video itself. Every notification had a new message from someone inquiring about his plans, someone again emailing him the same video, and someone asserting that he must be devastated. People had already created the story that he was angry even though he hadn't said anything yet. Some claimed to have heard him confront Yandy right away, while others claimed he remained mute and aloof. The rumor machine didn't care that nobody understood how he truly felt. He appeared to be a man on the verge of exploding as it continued to push story after narrative. Things immediately became strained within their circle. Little talks become lengthy discussions. Those who were close to them began to worry about how quickly things were getting worse. Friends began contacting Yandy to ask how she was doing, whether she needed anything, and whether the reports were upsetting her. She made an effort to ignore it, claiming that a low-quality video wouldn't destroy her mood. But she was secretly troubled by the whispers. She understood how online tales take on life of their own, even though she was aware that the story was exaggerated. It seemed as though thousands of strangers were piecing together their own version of her life with every refresh, bringing with it new remarks, interpretations, and accusations. More voices joined the discourse as the evening wore on. On a live stream, someone said they knew someone who had been there that evening. Afterwards, someone else claimed to have heard an argument. People listened with wide eyes and enthusiastic responses, but none of it was confirmed. Travis Cure was reportedly spotted hurrying out. Yandy appeared shaken, according to another person. Anything that fueled the flames was accepted by the online viewers. What had begun as a hazy film became a full-fledged narrative that seemed to transcend reality by the time the sun set. Mendeecees felt overburdened by the pressure of the frequent mentions in the midst of all of this. He made an effort to ignore the commotion, but he was constantly pulled into every conversation. The constant pressure from individuals who didn't know him made things seem weird. Some encouraged him to speak up, while others insisted he remain tough. He was uncomfortable with the notion that people were building whole stories around his name without knowing anything. After a while, he sat down and watched the video again, staring at the blurry images to try to figure out what people were seeing that gave them such confidence. However, his confusion increased as he continued to watch. He was unable to properly identify anything. He was unsure whether the figure was indeed Yandy. However, he felt that he was expected to respond, to be upset, or to take some sort of dramatic action because of the responses he saw online. At last, Yandy called him, attempting to maintain a steady tone. She informed him that she didn't want their mood to be determined by internet gossip. She clarified that everyone was exaggerating things and that the video was worthless. However, he could sense the annoyance in her voice, the kind that results from being assessed by strangers. In an attempt to separate the digital cacophony from the actual person speaking to him, he listened carefully and tried to take in what she was saying. She assured him that she would not allow strangers to disturb their tranquility. She claimed that the scenario was absurd and exaggerated. However, despite her best efforts to seem composed, there was a softness in her voice that showed how exhausting the situation was become. Throughout the commotion, Travis Cure remained largely silent. He didn't reply to the comments or the tags. His quiet was interpreted as maturity by some and guilt by others. A few supporters stood up for him, telling everyone to relax and wait for clarification. However, the sensible voices were overpowered by the louder ones. Seldom does silence on the internet make things better. Rather, it turns into a blank canvas onto which people project their presumptions. Someone said he was staying out of the spotlight so as not to exacerbate the situation. Another person asserted that he intended to speak out shortly. It was all unconfirmed. However, every rumor made the situation seem more expansive, as if the narrative would not stop spreading in many directions. The story became increasingly more twisted as the hours went by. People created threads by dissecting the video frame by frame. A few fans began to quarrel with one another. Minor arguments escalated into intense arguments. The height matched Yandy's, according to one person. Another claimed that the attire didn't go with anything she had lately worn. In an attempt to construct a timeline that supported their hypotheses, they compared her previous interviews, recent appearances, and social media activities. The discussion devolved into an enormous web of interpretations that were all fervently defended yet unproven. In an attempt to console her, Yandy's closest friends reminded her that the internet enjoys fabricating drama when none exists. They assured her that the truth would ultimately out and that people would move on. However, the simmering tension continued to develop around her. She didn't want to be at the epicenter of a gossip. She didn't want her every action scrutinized by others. She was encircled by a fog of presumptions from which she was unable to break free. Despite her desire for clarity, tranquility, and routine, additionally, the strain on Mendeecees increased. In anticipation of a major emotional reaction, individuals started tagging him in live reactions. Someone said he was getting ready to face Yandy already. He was heartbroken, according to someone else. The internet community has already prepared his responses, even though he hadn't said a single thing in public. And he experienced a mixture of disbelief and fury as he browsed through the countless allegations. He questioned how something so ambiguous could erupt into such a massive uproar. And even though he wanted to believe what he personally thought, the constant onslaught of viewpoints began to eat away at him, causing him to doubt everything in unexpected ways. The distinction between reality and rumor became increasingly hazy as the tension between what was being said and what was true continued to grow. There was a heavier feeling surrounding the situation, as if things was going to change once more, unaware of how profoundly the narrative was impacting those caught up in it. Even those who weren't typically interested in drama found themselves dragged into the discussion, eager about the next turn the online world might take. People in their immediate vicinity noticed how the pressure was impacting everyone involved as soon as the conversation started to become more serious. The change in energy was sensed even by those who made an effort to remain silent. The tale had evolved from being merely an internet rumor to something that permeated private messages, private discussions, and casual remarks that had weights they were unaware they were adding. Yandy's surroundings saw a significant transformation. While some people chatted with a kind of inquisitive excitement and treated the situation as entertainment, rather than something that may actually disturb someone's tranquility, others asked gentle questions. Yandy's chest began to slowly burn with agony. As she went through the texts that were stacking up on her phone, every fresh remark eroded her patience, even though she kept urging herself not to take it personally. She wanted to breathe normally, but she felt besieged by the continual reminders of what people believed they saw. She attempted to ignore everything. But this strategy only works in situations where the noise isn't loud enough to follow you everywhere. Every time someone brought up the subject, even in passing, her friends could see the strain in her shoulders and the way she let out a long breath. She couldn't lie to herself, but she also didn't want to acknowledge how deeply it affected her. Mendeecees struggled with contradictory feelings. He wanted to have complete faith in her, but the constant conversation and the constant tagging started to cloud his judgment. He wasn't upset with her. Rather, he was upset with the circumstances and the outsiders who continued to feed an unfounded fire. Hearing everyone's theories made him think in circles, even though he knew the clip was too ambiguous to establish anything. The more people insisted on offering him advice on how to manage the problem, the more frustrated he became. Even though he didn't want to snap, their conversation became tense. Not because they didn't trust each other, but rather because they were tired. Every discussion seems to return to the same subject. Every effort to bring about peace was eclipsed by a new round of remarks or an altered video that someone posted to agitate the situation. Instead of being explosive, the tension was gradual, creeping. The kind that gradually builds until it is impossible to ignore. He couldn't ignore the commotion entirely, but he also didn't want to approach her with claims he didn't believe. Travis Cure said nothing, yet his quiet garnered even more attention. People began to believe that he was purposefully evading the matter. Someone claimed that Yandy and Travis had lately been close in a lengthy breakdown. Someone else claimed to have witnessed them laughing together at an earlier gathering. Even if an observation had always been innocuous, it was twisted into something sinister. The internet transformed spontaneous encounters into intentional activities and coincidences into signs. Travis's close pals started messaging him to inquire about his situation. Some advised him to dispel the reports, while others urged him to do so. He decided to keep silent because he didn't want to create needless trouble. However, he was unaware of the extent to which people would use their own thoughts to break the stillness. And although he generally managed public attention with his cool head, this time the story continued to develop without his involvement. The stillness that had previously shielded him was now open to many meanings that he had not intended. The scenario became much more difficult due to the divergent replies. Some followers vehemently backed Yandy, arguing that she should be respected and given consideration. Others didn't wait for clarification before blaming her. Mendeecees experienced the same thing. While some claimed he was being humiliated, others advised him to have faith in her. Some fans even made it seem like a fight between the two, picking sides as if they were watching a contest instead of two people under actual emotional strain. Bloggers started reporting on the topic as it gained traction. Some portrayed it as a growing rumor, while others embellished specifics to increase interest. Dramatic headlines appeared, attracting people who had not even seen the original video. Every headline exacerbated the situation, giving the impression that a significant event had already occurred. And the narrative gained new impetus as bloggers intervened. Social media feeds were overflowing with theories, analysis, videos, and reactions. Everyone was more interested in entertainment than in confirming anything. Mendeecees eventually came to a breaking point. He only felt exhausted by the incessant conjecture. He didn't yell or toss objects. Even though he was aware that the story being promoted did not align with reality, he was nevertheless burdened by expectations. He didn't want to be the victim or the antagonist in a narrative that he had never consented to be a part of. Instead of turmoil, he wanted clarity. He desired the return of his voice, one that wasn't muffled by unfamiliar voices. The air between him and Yandy seemed heavy when he finally tried to speak to her directly. She was worn out, and there was a level of worry in her eyes that she hadn't spoken. She attempted to grin, but it fell short of her eyes when he asked how she was doing. She expressed to him how upset and irritated she was that something so ambiguous had grown to be such a big concern. She reiterated that the situation was being exaggerated and that the rumors were unfounded. He felt the sincerity in her remarks as he listened and nodded gently. However, there was a persistent tension that neither of them could get rid of while they were speaking. The outside world had thrown so much noise at them that it was difficult for them to think properly. Not because they didn't trust each other. The emotional weight between them seemed like something they needed to carefully examine, even if they weren't fighting. They both realized that allowing rumors to control their responses would only be detrimental. Nevertheless, the pressure made everything seem fragile, as though a single incorrect word could send them into yet another round of miscommunication stoked by strangers. People in the larger circle kept spreading rumors. Someone asserted that the video had a new angle. Someone else claimed to have inside information, and other theories that blended imagination and fact surfaced. And the emotional toll on all those involved in the story increased as it did. However, there was a feeling that something more profound was developing behind all the commotion. Something that would eventually compel them to face the problem in a way that none of them wanted but could no longer escape. Even though nobody knew exactly where the situation was headed or how far the rumors would push the emotions. Already simmering quietly beneath the surface, the tension kept building, making every moment feel like it was heading someplace. The strain that was building around them didn't lessen. Instead, the situation became more complicated with every hour that went by, even though the majority of people had no idea what had actually transpired. The story that had begun as a hazy clip had now become something that people talked with complete certainty. Even people who had initially disregarded the rumor started asking questions out of pure curiosity as the commotion got louder. Everyone concerned was forced into unprepared emotional corners by the seemingly never-ending rumors Yandy attempted to handle the situation by diverting her attention with work. But stress cannot be eliminated by distraction. She couldn't stop thinking about the incident, wondering how something so innocuous could have turned into such a huge stress wave. She was aware that she shouldn't allow strangers to control her life. But every new post that scrutinized her every action gave her the impression that she was being watched closely. She desired quiet. But people's constant checking of their feeds in search of the next twist made quiet impossible. Mendeecees, on the other hand, was torn between wanting to keep her safe and needing answers that were hard to put into words. Even if he didn't accept the accusations, he was restless due to the persistent pressure from outside voices. He was upset at being forced into a defensive stance that he never requested, not at her. He detested the idea that strangers had the right to make unfounded conclusions about their relationship. He was so emotionally spent that even little things started to annoy him. Not because they were important. One evening, they attempted to have a calm talk in the hopes that the peaceful setting might aid in their reconnection. However, the anxiety persisted even in that quiet. When she inquired whether he was all right, he replied that he was making an effort. But there was a weight in his voice that he didn't mean to convey. He paused before acknowledging that the continual conjecture was overwhelming him when she asked what was most upsetting him. She understood. But she was also offended that the commotion outside had put an unwarranted barrier between them. Rather than arguing, they had a gentle conversation as they each tried to figure out how to proceed. However, as they talked, they became aware that the issue was not between them, but rather with their surroundings. It seemed nearly impossible to break free from the narrative that the world had created around their names. She informed him that what people were saying had nothing to do with the truth. He nodded, believing her, but still bearing the burden of being judged by the public. Meanwhile, fresh theories continued to be promoted online. There was more footage, according to some claims. Others said that someone who knew both Yandy and Travis was getting ready to expose the truth. None of this was supported by any proof, but rumors may be disseminated online without proof. Thousands of individuals joined the debate thanks to the bold captions and dramatic headlines. Travis learned about fresh posts that attempted to further connect him to the circumstance. He thought the story's rapid escalation was ridiculous. He didn't want drama to be created, but he also didn't want stories to be made about him. Nevertheless, he decided to remain mute in the hopes that the commotion would soon subside. However, as each hour went by, more individuals messaged him, tagged him, and asked him questions without understanding his viewpoint. Even those who knew him well laughed at how crazy the story had gotten, but it didn't really help. The accusations didn't make him feel ashamed. Rather, he was annoyed that someone had seized a chance, combined it with creativity, and made it into a scandal. He was worried about how long he could remain silent before someone misinterpreted his silence as affirmation, even though he didn't want to pull anyone into a public back-and-forth. Mendeecees single quotes his family began phoning him in the midst of the conflict to see how he was doing rather than to accuse him or take sides. He didn't really want advice, yet several people gave it to him. Others attempted to soothe him by telling him that such circumstances will pass. However, he wanted clarification and serenity as quickly as possible and didn't want to wait for the crisis to pass. He detested feeling trapped in a spotlight that he had never requested. Yandy's close friends also attempted to console her, reminding her that once everyone moved on to the next topic, this kind of chaos generally subsided quickly. However, she was aware that this was different. It was inevitable that anything pertaining to her marriage would garner a lot more attention, particularly when a famous person like Travis was involved. The continual reminders that she was being scrutinized in public made her feel smothered. Her stomach turned every time she browsed through her phone and saw remarks speculating on her personality. Even her supporters inadvertently increased the pressure. They insisted that she make a definitive statement. They advised her to establish her innocence. However, she didn't want to encourage a rumor by treating it as fact. She didn't want to stand up for something that had never occurred. She thought that the truth didn't need to be revealed online. But the longer she kept quiet, the more people made up stories about what they thought had happened. She felt cut off from everything because of the emotional burden she was carrying. She began to steer clear of discussions that even touched on the subject. Normal felt far away, yet she wanted to feel normal once more. Every time she considered going outside, she pictured someone pointing at her, supposing they were aware of every aspect of her existence. It was tiredness, not dread. She didn't want to repeatedly experience the same rumor through other people's emotions. One particular aspect started to heighten the stress as all of this was happening. After a heated debate, someone on the internet reported seeing Mendeecees leave the residence. Even though no one could confirm it, the rumor quickly gained traction. However, the story was too compelling for many to doubt. Thus, proof was irrelevant. Commenters started fabricating tales about what they believed transpired within that residence. Screenshots of old pictures appeared again, along by text that exaggerated the scenario. Even those who typically avoided drama began talking about it as the strain increased. Influencers shared videos of their reactions, interpreting unrelated clips, body language as hints. Bloggers penned lengthy pieces detailing the possible fallout. The narrative went beyond reality, evolving into a version of itself that nobody could identify. Both Yandy and Mendeecees felt that something had to change as a result of all of this. Everything felt heavier than either of them anticipated because of the emotional pressure, the outside voices, and the constant conversations. Their surroundings continued to add stress to every moment, even though they weren't upset with one another. They were making an effort to maintain their composure and maintain their relationship. But the circumstances were drawing them closer to the point where they would have to face the facts, the rumors, and their emotions simultaneously. Something started to change within of them both. Not out of resentment or mistrust, but rather as a result of everything that was going on around them. Despite their best efforts to maintain composure, neither of them could ignore the impending emotional turning point. One thing became evident as the pressure increased. The world was refusing to let the rumor die, and the moment of confrontation was drawing nearer by the hour. The pivotal moment came late in the evening, when both of them could no longer bear the burden of everything. That night, the quiet in the house seemed heavier than usual, as if the air itself was waiting for them to say something. They had stayed away from the topic long enough in the hopes that the commotion outside would subside and that people would become disinterested. But things had only become louder. They were forced to remain silent until they could no longer pretend. Yandy's mind was racing with ideas. She didn't even want to face as she sat on the couch with her hands folded. She felt the weight of all they had been bearing, but she wasn't angry with him. She wanted to make things right, but she was unsure of where to begin. Her heart ached as she looked at him across the room and saw how exhausted he appeared. He sat in silence for a while before speaking. He didn't speak out. He didn't sound irate. Rather, he sounded exhausted, as though the burden of the whole thing had settled on his chest. He expressed to her his desire to end their ongoing tension. Despite knowing the truth, he claimed that the commotion outside was interfering with his thoughts. He acknowledged that the world's rapid transformation of their relationship into a show, rather than the rumor, was what wounded him. She paid close attention, attempting to decipher the feelings he was expressing. She told him that she experienced the same stress, annoyance, and tiredness from being held accountable for something that never occurred. She described how difficult it had been to maintain composure when each notification sparked fresh rumors. She wanted him to know that she detested how the chaos had spread into their home, and that she felt misinterpreted by the outside world. They didn't have an explosive conversation. It wasn't overly dramatic. It was cautious, slow, and sentimental. They were fighting the circumstances around them rather than one other. She expressed to him her wish that she had completely avoided going out in public that day. He assured her that she had done nothing wrong and that it was not her fault. He acknowledged that he had allowed the outside noise to have a greater impact on him than he had intended. As they conversed, he became aware of how estranged they had grown over the previous few days. They withdrew into themselves due to the ongoing tension, not out of mistrust. They both expressed regret for allowing the pressure to control their feelings. She acknowledged that she became overwhelmed and shut down. He acknowledged that he separated himself in order to avoid saying something unintentionally out of frustration. They eventually started letting go of the burden they had been carrying by admitting these facts. The mood eased following that intense encounter. A feeling of relief gradually took the place of the stress that had been present. When they finally said what needed to be said, they both felt relieved. However, they were aware that the outside noise would not go away immediately, even though the chat was helpful. The rumors continued to circulate. There were still new theories emerging. The world continued to speculate. However, the emotional tempest had begun to subside inside the house. Travis, however, stayed out of the scene and watched from a distance as things got worse. He considered making a comment, but he didn't want to attract further attention. He thought that encouraging the rumor would just provide more material for individuals to fabricate. Nevertheless, he detested being drawn into drama in which he had no involvement. He didn't point the finger at anyone specifically, but he was annoyed that a seemingly insignificant incident had become a major story. On the internet, individuals kept coming up with fresh ideas. While some attempted to paint him as the antagonist, others vigorously defended him. Some said he owed the world an explanation. However, he disregarded everything, telling himself that whatever he said would be twisted into something different, by attempting to defend something that didn't require defense. He wasn't going to encourage any more conjecture. The chatter surrounding the rumors started to change as the days went by. As news stories gained popularity, the intensity around their predicament gradually subsided. However, the emotional impact persisted even as the focus shifted. Everyone participating was impacted by the experience. It served as a reminder of how easily a brief incident may spread around the world. It demonstrated to them the actual unpredictability of the realm of speculation. Yandy found herself thinking carefully about all that had transpired. She pondered how unjust it was to have strangers analyzing every action she took. She wanted people were aware of the dangers of making assumptions. She was also appreciative that she and Mendeecees faced the problem head-on rather than allowing the pressure to destroy them. She understood that the only way to weather such storms was to communicate clearly. Mendeecees also reflected. He felt bad about letting outside noise disturb his tranquility. Instead of keeping things inside, he was happy that he had spoken honestly. After confronting something so draining together, he became aware of how much stronger their bond felt. The emotional voyage made them see each other more clearly. Despite the absurdity of the rumor, they both acknowledged that they needed some time away from the mayhem. They made the decision to spend a few days together in a peaceful location away from their typical settings, where no one would question them or examine their facial expressions. By reminding themselves of their true connection rather than the version of their relationship that people talked about online, they sought to restore the ease between them. They were able to breathe again during those peaceful days. They felt more like themselves when there were less notifications and rumors. They chatted honestly, laughed together, and let the stress subside on its own. For those few days, they were only concerned with one another. Even though the outer world was still whirling, the internet scenario had largely subsided by the time they got home. As is typically the case with the internet, people had moved on to new subjects. The gossip that had previously seemed intolerable now appeared far away, almost unimportant. Although the emotional turmoil persisted, it was no longer overpowering. After surviving something that could have easily caused long-term harm, they both felt stronger, more rooted, and more linked. Although the event altered their perspective of the world, it did not alter who they were. It served as a reminder that rumors have the potential to suddenly turn into storms. They learned the importance of communication, particularly when dealing with public pressure. It demonstrated to them that they could restore their relationship from the inside out, even while the outside world sought to destroy it. They didn't harbor resentment toward those who disseminated the rumor. They were aware that drama was popular on the internet. However, they discovered something crucial. Fear need not be used to defend the truth. Through deeds and clarity, truth speaks softly and persistently. Yet despite the fact that the rumor had caused them to worry for days, it had also helped them understand one another better. They went back to their routines with a fresh sense of serenity. As the last bits of anxiety subsided, they had taken back the narrative despite the world's attempts to write it for them. They moved forward with greater power based on their mutual understanding rather than what others had to say about them. Even while the rumor had produced uncertainty, commotion, and emotional strain, it also made clear something important. No matter how loud the world gets, clarity can always be found in open communication, consistent connection, and the willingness to listen when it counts most. Mendeecees stood there in a hush so dense that it seemed as though the air had stopped. Exhaustion, grief, bewilderment, and a hint of love were all mixed together in his eyes. Yandy stood in front of him, breathing erratically, as if the next thing he said would determine her entire future. The home had fallen into an unbelievable silence, the kind that envelops a moment before an irreparable event occurs. The hallway was filled with the soft sniffles of the children, knowing that he had no role in whatever came next. Travis Cure had already taken a step back. After briefly closing his eyes and calming his breathing, Mendeecees muttered, "Yandy, I'm tired. I'm genuinely sick of bearing this burden and trying to persuade everyone that we are strong, cohesive, and indestructible." The cacophony outside grows louder when the truth inside the house begins to crumble. Yandy's heart fell to the ground as she froze. I know what I did. I know I injured you. But I need you to believe me when I say I didn't plan to break us, she said, shaking as she moved closer to him in fear. Please don't let this be the end, I beg you. Her voice wavered around the space, resonating off the walls like a last-ditch effort to find a place to settle. At last, Mendeecees raised his head and gave her a look. It was the kind of glance that conveyed a decision through the weight behind his eyes, rather than through words. Outside, there were a ton of theories on social media. Mendeecees, according to others, had already contacted a lawyer. Others thought he would never leave Yandy, since such intense love doesn't go away overnight. However, none of that mattered inside the house. In this room, only the truth did. Mendeecees approached her slowly. He didn't sound angry when he talked. It was delicate, almost brittle. Something inside of me fell apart when I saw you with him. I'm still trying to figure out what part of me broke and what part of me is still clinging to you. Tears ran down Yandy's cheeks as her lips quivered, knowing that her mother was barely hanging on. Courtney stood behind her and covered her lips with her palm. Trying not to cry, Travis Cure shifted his weight. His face twisted with shame, but as he attempted to move closer, Mendeecees abruptly raised his hand, stopping him silently. It wasn't his time. This was not his dialogue. Nothing was permitted to break up this conversation between Mendeecees and Yandy. Mendeecees stared into Yandy's eyes for a long time, as though he was trying to find something in her soul that only he could see. Then he said, "Tonight doesn't end us, but it changes things. I can't lie to myself either, even though I don't want to leave you. I must take a breath. I need time to comprehend my own emotions." With trembling palms and a barely audible whisper, Yandy nodded slowly. "I'll accept whatever you decide. I'll make things right if that's what you desire. I'll prove myself if you want me to. Please don't remove me from your life." Mendeecees lightly touched her shoulder. It was more like someone stroking a memory they weren't sure would last the night than the warmth he used to give her. With a sigh, he added,